We all know it's January, the start of a new year. Many people, including myself, have New Year's resolutions. Some of these resolutions may have already been gone away. However, we know that it's never too late to change your story. Whether we're 9 years old or 90 years old, we can start again at any time in our lives. Tonight, we're going to hear about 6 storytellers that have proven that it's never too late to change our story. I'm sure that most of us in this room can relate to changing our story. You will also be moved by the music tonight. A big thank you to all of you for coming. I know you'll not be disappointed. And welcome to our online attendees as well. You know, our stories are powerful. We all have stories to tell. Some people say, well, I don't have a story to tell. I can assure you, you do. They shape us, they move us, and they especially inspire us. They make us shout for joy and weep in our disappointments. And the Hearth was started in Ashland in 2010, and Hyla and I were taught by Mark Iaconelli. You know, a big thank you to the Ford Family Foundation that got us started, the Oregon Community Foundation, Bethany Presbyterian Church, Mark Iaconelli, who was kind of our mentor in this whole process, and actually still is, and our amazing team. Tonight's topic, it is never too late to change our stories. Stories help us make sense of our lives. However, when our stories are incomplete or misleading, they can keep us stuck instead of providing clarity. When we're able to break free from our stories, we tell ourselves by becoming our own story editor, and we can rewrite a new narrative from a different point of view. One of the things also about Hearth and the community is nonprofits, and it's the nonprofit key is really part, and we appreciate everybody's help with the contributions to recognize nonprofits in the community. And tonight, it's Growing Together Family Community Center. You know, all ages are important, but that 0 to 5 is a special part of our overall growth. And unfortunately for many of us, it's many in the community, it may not be difficult to provide services. And so this family, Growing Together allows that. And I have visited Growing Together and have been amazed at the valuable services that they provide. Tonight we're going to hear a little bit more about this nonprofit from Sadie Emmons, Executive Director. Sadie?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm Sadie. I don't really have a title there because it's sort of jack of all trades. It's truly a program that has been supported and built by the community. It's about 18 months old, so it's still in its toddler phase. The reason why we came up with the idea of even having this community center, particularly geared towards families with children with 0 to 5, is because there really wasn't a lot of support, especially in Josephine County, to support these families. And so after sitting on a lot of different meetings and hearing from kindergarten teachers and preschool teachers and talking to families that have little ones, we asked, what do you need? What can we do? And it just kind of came to fruition that we put together a place, and then with the community support, we're able to provide all this great programming. It's kind of like all these really great programs were out there, nonprofits, everybody had a little piece, and now we have a really great pie. So we're able to provide programs such as martial arts, Aikido, kinder music, children's yoga, kaleidoscope play and learn groups. These are all programs that are evidence-based, are in social and emotional learning, and we provide all these programs for free. So it's really great. Another big thing is really changing the culture of parenting, that it's an inclusive location. It feels really good, and the premise is that you have a child, it's the hardest job in the world, and we want to support you. You are the most important person in that child's life, and it doesn't matter what your economic status is or any of that. And so we really want to put it out there that all families can use support, and all families can, walk in and take advantage of this really great programming. It's also where we focus on early literacy. And like I said, it was like kind of the first time we heard of this idea of social emotional learning. That is the best prevention out there. So we're really taking advantage of that. And the whole idea of the center is to have, so when children enter kindergarten, they're ready to learn. So I'm really excited about it. We also provide a diaper bank. We have formula, and families come in and with the wanting to look for those necessities, and then they look around, and next thing you know, they're at the play groups, and then they're taking parenting classes, and they're walking out with groups of friends, and they're meeting at parks. So really, we're creating this incredible environment that is strengthening our community. So yeah, and anyone's welcome. Stop in. We're typically open from 9 to 2. And we'd love to give you a tour. So thank you very much for your generous donations tonight. It's going to a really great cause. Thanks.
Thank you, Sadie, for that update, and more importantly, for what you do every day. Thank you. We're going to start out our Hearth tonight with music from the Three Rivers Chorale. And Three Rivers Chorale was founded in 2004 by singers who had a desire to sing challenging and beautiful choral music and share it in concert with friends and neighbors in Josephine County. Kate Campbell's been the chorale's music and artistic director since 2009, and their upcoming spring concert celebrates 20 years of singing together in our county. Please help me welcome Three Rivers Chorale for Sanctus. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick word about this first piece. There wasn't room on the program, so this is from our recent concert, Dream Time, Music for Dream Time. It is a song by Ola Yelo, who's one of our favorite composers, and all of the composers of the music tonight that we are singing were born in the 1970s. I don't know what that means, but or what you call that generation, but they are amazing, amazing composers. So this first one is from Ola Yelo's brand new Twilight Mass, and it is the next to the last movement. It is called Sanctus, and it is in Latin.
Thank you. Our first storyteller is Jennifer Roberts, and Jennifer is a writer whose debut novel, The Village Healer's Book of Cures, was published in November of 2023. She and her husband, Tim, have lived in Grants Pass since 2001 and have two phenomenally awesome daughters, Lucy and Miriam, whose stories have only just begun. Jennifer's story is to be continued.
Should I just pull this down? Oh, hi, y'all. There's a lot of you out there. So it's taken me years to be able to say this, years of hard work and rejection, but I am a novelist. As Steve mentioned, my novel, The Village Healer's Book of Cures, was published in November. And as a novelist, my stories, as you can imagine, are my bread and butter. I think a lot about, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, so I might be a little hesitant. There's a lot of y'all out there. Did I mention that already? Okay. As you can imagine, I think a lot about beginnings and endings and about sequels and prequels. Tonight, I'll tell a bit of my story, but I also want to talk about stories in a general sort of way, about how they allow us to preserve hope, to imagine a better day, and to work towards a better future. The last time I attended the Hearth, it was February of 2020, and I was bald. Not the cute, fuzzy-haired, just shave my head bald, but the really smooth bald with non-existent eyebrows and eyelashes falling out that can only come from chemotherapy. Those of you who have been through it will know what I mean. I actually used to like rubbing my little bald head, but it was hard. I'd been diagnosed the summer before with stage 1 breast cancer. We'd caught it early with a preventative mammogram, and here, this is where I tell everybody to remember to get all of your preventative tests, mammograms and everything. My prognosis was and is excellent. But based on my age and genetic testing, my doctors advised me to be aggressive with my treatment. So we did everything: surgery, chemo, radiation, hormone blockers. They threw the full arsenal at me. But this isn't a story about cancer. This is a story about stories. So as a storyteller, maybe I shouldn't frame the opening there. Maybe I should move it a little earlier. The year before, my youngest daughter had graduated high school, and my husband and I were looking forward to an empty nest. A new chapter of my story was pretty obviously starting, and I got a job as an adjunct professor at Southern Oregon University. You guys, I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the planning, I loved the classes, I loved the students. I hated the grading, I'll admit that. Nobody likes grading, but everything else. And I loved my colleagues and my supervisors. So when I told them about the cancer and asked for 2 weeks off to recover from surgery, I thought there would be no problem. But instead, my bosses took away my teaching contract and gave my classes, which I had planned and created and thought of and executed, they took them away and gave them to other instructors. And that really sucked. But since we're talking about stories, let's imagine we frame that scene as the end. The story becomes middle-aged woman gets cancer and her bosses fire her. If you end there, the story is a sad one, even enraging. It sets up a discussion of all sorts of things like capitalism versus academia, and of budgets pitted against human need and community. But let's reframe. Let's look ahead a month. I went to Twitter and I posted about this situation. That post was liked and shared thousands of times. It went viral across Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Calls came in from other states, even other countries, and media types and lawyers called SOU and told them that what they were doing was discriminatory. And guess what? I got my job back. Hey! Hey! Let's pretend now that that's the ending frame. If we frame it there, the story has a happy ending, like almost after school special type happy, right? Like all the good feels, right? And we get to talk about the power of community and the sometimes good stories that can come out of social media. But remember how I said the last time I'd been here had been in February of 2020. Do y'all remember what happened the month after February of 2020? Right. So COVID hit, and it was lockdown. And I lost my job anyway, because the university was locked down. You know, you can't win. So stop the story there and frame it, and this becomes like an absurdist fable, or at least it did to me at that point, right? It was like Kafkaesque. It was ridiculous. It was hopeless. Couldn't win for trying. But fast forward, I finished that novel during COVID, and the novel just got published. Stop, frame, happy story. You can all see the pattern here. In some ways, this is a lesson as old as time. It's all in the way you look at things, the way you frame them. Mark Twain once said, "Humor is tragedy plus time." And maybe that's why, as we get older, ideally, we get smarter and wiser. We have more stories in our arsenal, and so we become more aware that endings and beginnings are sometimes either side of the same coin. Sorry, I don't memorize things very well, so I've got my little cheat sheet up here. It's old and ancient, hard-earned wisdom. But there's also powerful new research that shows us that the way we imagine and tell our stories has a profound impact on how we remember our past and think of our future. I recently came across an article about the medial frontal gyrus, which researchers described, I love this description, you guys, as a swath of spongy brain folds. Isn't that great? A swath of spongy brain folds on the outside middle region of the frontal lobe. It is the seat of your identity. It is your you. Researchers in the journal Neuron explain that the function of the medial frontal gyrus is to learn associations between context, location, events, and particularly emotional responses. The medial frontal gyrus, I'm just going to keep repeating it because it's a cool sounding thing. It facilitates decision-making, long-term memory recall, and it helps with memory and consolidation in timescales ranging from seconds to years. In other words, this part of the brain is a storyteller. But the brain is tricky, isn't it? The medial frontal gyrus is located next to parts of the brain that control negative emotions, judgment, and attention. In other words, it lets us decide whether to pay attention to bad feelings. It can turn our good stories into bad stories, transform our romances and our comedies into tragedies. So what do we do with this? What do we do with this new knowledge? How do we use it to celebrate our wins and for the successes that they are, and reframe our losses away from pure devastation? We time travel. Scientists call it chronesthesia, and it's, quote, the brain's natural ability to be constantly aware of past and future versions of ourselves. It's believed to be the basis of human consciousness. I think chronesthesia is a fancy way of talking about getting perspective, of moving the frame of your story around in time. If you'll indulge me, let's reframe my story again. Whether or not I publish another book is highly variable. Sales, reviews, and market trends all play a role. I see some folks smiling out there. They're like, yeah, I've been there. My publisher may say no to the next manuscript, but that's only one frame. I can time travel, reimagine. Maybe they'll say yes, and I'll build a relationship with them. Maybe they'll say no, and I will be disappointed, right? But I can time travel and imagine a time ahead of that. What might happen after that refusal? Maybe it'll spur me on to write and publish a better novel. This may not be the end, but the beginning. Or it might be like the middle third or the second half of the first part of the middle, you know? But barring something unforeseen, this is not the end. Unlike novels, our stories go on. Since I've introduced this time travel, this chronesthesia, into our time here, I'd like to end with a quote from arguably the most famous time traveler, and if you know, you know. It's the Doctor from the BBC's TV series, sci-fi series, Doctor Who. He says, "We are all stories in the end. Just make it a good one." Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Our next story is Gabrielle Johnson, and she is a community organizer and a homeschool mama. Her work with Grants Pass Remembrance, a truth and reconciliation project, who partners with the Oregon Remembrance Project and the Sunrise Project work, embodies much of what she cares about: racial reconciliation, learning and growing together with neighbors, and supporting opportunities to see and hear the others in our lives and community. Please help me welcome Gabby Johnson as she speaks about truth and reconciliation are sequential.
You're tall, Steve. Hello, friends. Jennifer, that was a lovely setup. Thank you. Up into the 60s and 70s, our beautiful community of Grants Pass was an active sundown town. A sundown town is a community where, through a culture of fear, violence, and intimidation, African Americans and other racial minorities were prevented from living here or even passing through. But it's never too late to change your story. Now, the story I have to share tonight is my own story of getting involved with this little piece of Grants Pass's story and how I was changed. I moved into town in 2012 with my husband and my 1-year-old son, and I was ready for life in a small town. I was ready for Grants Pass. I was excited to get to be in the Pacific Northwest, which is so beautiful. I was excited to get to put down roots and get to have a community that I could call my own and raise my children in. I was ready to love it, even though in many ways it was not what I had anticipated settling in, but I was excited. Now, I'd been here probably a couple months before a conversation that happened at church. I was talking to a woman who, I think we were probably talking about Portland. Portland was held in some skepticism in that space. We're chatting about that, and then she shared a bit of juicy piece of gossip. At least it seemed like she thought that. And she said, "Did you hear about this curfew sign that used to be on the bridge? You know, the one saying that African Americans had to be out by sundown." Now, this was not just a juicy bit of gossip for me. This was serious stuff. My brother would be coming into town in a month. My brother is biracial, and I wanted to know, what is going on with this? When did the sign go up? Why did the sign go up? When did it come down? Why did it come down? Are people still like that here? I wanted to know. But she had no answers for me, none that were satisfying at least. Well, my brother's visit came and went with relative ease, aside from the usual questions and comments and stares that we get. But I still wasn't satisfied. And as the years went on, as we raised our family and made friends and found a community here and came to love Grants Pass, I began to read voraciously, reading on the experiences of my Black brothers and sisters and their experience of racism in our country. And a particular question began to burn in me. What do we do now? What do we do now? And then I found stories on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Oh my goodness, I'm so thankful for them. And that question became more pointed. What does reconciliation even look like in our country with our complex, long, many-layered history of racism and racial hierarchy in the United States? What does reconciliation even look like? Now, some point in this process, I remember my husband asking me, what is going on? Here we were in a predominantly white community, and we were in predominantly conservative circles that didn't tend to talk about race and racism ever. And I was a homeschooling mama of 2, and this is what I was spending my extra time on. And I remember being just as bewildered and eventually kind of saying, it's a part of my brother's story, and so it's a part of my story. And that's all I had at the moment. But then I found Bryan Stevenson. Oh my goodness, a light went on when I found Bryan Stevenson. Now, in case that name is not familiar to any of you, Bryan Stevenson wrote a book called Just Mercy. It was made into a movie a couple years ago. And look him up. Look him up. He's a civil rights lawyer, and he opened 2 museums. He has a quote that says, "We are all more than the worst thing we have ever done." Bryan Stevenson was talking about reconciliation in the United States and our history of racism against African Americans. And Bryan Stevenson was doing work in reconciliation on that. And I was excited. Bryan Stevenson also has a quote that says, "Truth and reconciliation are sequential. You have to tell the truth before you can reconcile." Now, right around that time, I got to go to this room, a Martin Luther King Jr. gathering, January 2020, in this room. And I was so ready. I was so ready to talk to people. I was so ready to do something. Have you ever been so ready to do something that you go to find the people that are doing it, and then you look around and you suddenly realize, I think that's me. I think I'm supposed to be doing something. Oh my goodness, that MLK gathering was my moment. There were people definitely talking about things. There were people definitely doing things, but I wanted to talk about our history in Grants Pass, and there weren't people doing that. And that was my moment of realizing, I think that's me. Now, I started after that in January 2020, a season that I call my breadcrumb season, following the breadcrumbs. Now, I'm a Christian, and this whole process had been with God all along, but that season was different because I suddenly knew I was going somewhere. I knew it. We are going somewhere, but I had absolutely no idea where we were going. And so it was this season of doing one thing, having no idea what's next, and then kind of noticing, that thing over there, okay, and then we'll do that thing. Hey, look, there's that thing, okay, we'll do that thing next. And it ended up being a 6-month process of producing a booklet that's called The History of Racism Against African Americans in Oregon in Grants Pass. Reverend Ernestine advised on it. She's a local woman here. You should get to know her. She's great. My professor sister-in-law edited it. My conservative best friend edited it. And my husband, my techie husband, formatted it and critiqued it and advised on it. And 2 different authors gave their permission to use their work in it. I'm so thankful for Brian Stevenson because I knew that we had to start with the truth. You have to start with the truth before you can reconcile. And oh, I wanted reconciliation in this community. I wanted it so bad. 2 weeks before we were ready to print this, now mind you, my neighbors are still not talking about race and racism. And if you're tracking with the timeline, you'll be aware that my neighbors are now definitely talking about masks and quarantine, or no masks and no quarantine, and all of the things that that entails. We were most definitely not talking about race and racism. But 2 weeks before we're ready to print, and George Floyd is killed. I remember that night so clearly. I usually get my news from friends. I am not a news reader, but for some reason, I got that news from a news source. I was sitting on the couch, and I felt like I got punched in the gut. And I spent the rest of the night trying to find spaces to weep without disturbing my family. I took a shower, but it wasn't done. I went upstairs and tried to hide myself away, and it wasn't done. And eventually, I kissed my kids goodnight and said goodnight to my husband and went downstairs. Because at some point in the night, I remembered a story that I had heard months before about a man who had been praying for his indigenous brothers and sisters and had asked God to share with him his heart about this. And after days in prayer, he became overwhelmed with grief, and he wept for hours over the atrocities that his indigenous brothers and sisters had experienced at the hands of his neighbors. And so I knew what was happening. So after I kissed my kids and my husband, I went downstairs and I let myself weep. I wept over the hurt and harm that George Floyd experienced in the last moments of his life. And I wept over the hurt and harm that my brothers and sisters, my black brothers and sisters, had experienced in knowing that his death had happened and why it had happened and how it had happened and what that meant to them. I wept over the hurt and harm that they'd been experiencing for generations in this country and that they still experience today. And eventually, when the weeping subsided, I was left with this quiet, with this peace. God was still there. God's heart was broken. I had only tasted a tiny bit of it, but he was still there. And where God is, faith, hope, and love remain. And I could taste that. I could taste the hope and even the joy of that. And then suddenly, my neighbors were talking about race and racism. My neighbors that never talked about race and racism were talking about it. And here I was with a booklet that I could hand them. Now, this is only the beginning of a story for me. And it's a story that's now not my own, that I share with so many others. It's a story that's become Grants Pass Remembrance. It's a story that we owe in so many ways to the support and leadership of Taylor Stewart with the Oregon Remembrance Project. You know, we talk about how our story as a sundown town doesn't have to end there. It can end instead with our becoming a sunrise community. It can end with us becoming a community that's committed to welcome, becoming a community where all our neighbors feel safe and respected and at home. We do have a hurtful and broken history in Grants Pass, but that doesn't have to be the end of the story. In the very midst of that, there is hope for redemption, there's hope for healing, there's hope for reconciliation. And it is good. You never know what's going to happen to your life when you get caught up in it, because it's never too late to change our story. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. Our next storyteller is Cassie Leach, and Cassie is a registered nurse, a mother of 2 wonderful teenagers, and a lifelong resident of Southern Oregon. She has long been devoted to the care of the disenfranchised, whether it be in Haiti for disaster relief or for the community of the unhoused in Grants Pass. She co-founded MINT, which is the Mobile Integrative Navigation Team, in 2022, and in charge of emergency preparedness for Josephine County Public Health with Leah Swanson. She has been described as being the heart, soul, and conscience of MINT. She began serving the unsheltered in Grants Pass by bringing COVID testing and vaccines, basic supplies, and Narcan into the parks via a small pull wagon in 2021. Soon, other community organizations started coordinating their outreach efforts with Cassie and Leah's efforts to bring necessary services to where they're needed in our parks. Change your story, change your life is our Hearth theme tonight. Cassie's story this evening will show how the growth and promise of MINT is due to her vision and passion to assist the unsheltered. Her story is titled, You Never Know Where You're Going to Find Community. Please help me welcome Cassie.
All right, can you hear me okay? I'm profoundly nervous and I've never done anything like this before, so bear with me. My story starts at the age of 17. I was a student at Hidden Valley High School. I was a senior. I was school president, had excellent grades, and I was getting ready to figure out what I was gonna do when I grew up. The problem was I had no idea. At the time, the AIDS epidemic in Africa was just blossoming. It was all over the news. It was all that was consuming my time at that point. I became really passionate about it. I remember I had to go to my high school guidance counselor and talk about colleges, and we were talking about Cal Poly, and I just broke down and started crying. And I told her, I don't want to go to college, I don't want to do this. I want to go to Africa, and I want to help with the AIDS epidemic. And she took me seriously. She listened to me. I mean, I sounded crazy, but she listened to me and she changed my life. She did some research and she found this organization called Cross-Cultural Solutions, and it was based out of New York City. And they offered me that opportunity that I was looking for. So I agreed to commit to a long-term trip to Ghana, West Africa. When I was there, I was going to be working with nurses, providing reproductive health and education in small villages, along with vaccines for children in the Volta region of Ghana. So I made the commitment, I graduated high school, and I started the quest to raise money, because it was pretty expensive. I remember sitting in my mom's A-frame house in Wilderville, Oregon, in the second story with my blue shaggy carpet, with a telephone book, a dial-up phone, a pen, and a piece of paper, and I called every single business one by one in the yellow pages. I told them what I was doing, and I asked for donations. I got $10 here, $20 there. I even got the Daily Courier to give me money if I agreed to give them 4 updates while I was gone. And they were gonna do articles, and I did. I gave them 4 updates, and they did the articles. And when I got home, I was mortified because they wrote the articles and they put the continent of Africa, a huge picture, and then on top of it, my head. Just a big, huge picture of my head. And when I got home, my friends made fun of me so much. But anyways, I was able to raise the money and I took off to Ghana, West Africa. And that trip changed my life. I, for the first time in my life, felt the sense of community that I didn't even know I was missing. I didn't know what it was at the time, but being with those people, being with those nurses, helping the vulnerable, that changed my life. I left there and I knew right away that I was gonna be a nurse. I knew right away. So I got home and I was in Grants Pass for about 2 weeks. And I said, no, I'm not going to college. So I raised money, I put my head down, and I raised enough money and worked to be able to go back to Ghana, West Africa for a second time just a few months later. So I took off with an open-ended ticket and the intent to stay there for a year. This time I did it a little differently. I'd met a pastor and his wife when I was there. And so I worked with them, and they were working in an international city, Accra, Ghana, working with people on the streets. I fell in love with this work. It was my jam. That sense of culture and community that I felt the first time I was in Ghana, I got it back, but it was stronger on the streets, and I just loved it. I also got to work with an NGO there called Sovereign Global Missions, because they worked with the pastor and his wife, and I ended up joining their board. And I was just in awe as an 18-year-old sitting with a group of people talking about how they can raise money and help other people. I just thought it was the coolest thing. So I'd been there about 2 to 3 months on this second trip, and I got an email from home that told me that my grandma was terminally ill and I needed to get home. My grandma was the only redhead in the family, and we had a gingerly bond, and so I had to get back to be with her. So I made the decision within 2 days to go back home, and all the money that I had raised to be there for a year, I gave to that NGO, because they were looking to buy a parcel of land. They were able to buy that parcel of land, and to this day, that parcel of land has a shelter, a trade school that teaches adults how to be financially independent, and a school for underprivileged children that can't afford school, and it's ran through a church. So anyways, I had to come home and be with my family, but I made 2 commitments this time, that I was going to become a nurse, and I was going to stay involved in the nonprofit world. It was shortly after coming home that I met my former husband, fell in love, became a nurse, and had 2 glorious kids. The years that I've been back since Ghana, I try to leave the country at least once a year with a nonprofit on medical missions. I've gone to a variety of countries. Most recently, I'd been frequently in Haiti. We were working in the south portion of the country in remote villages, and we were seeing some really neat return on investments and some of the health initiatives we were doing, and we were getting really excited. But then COVID happened. I think we've all mentioned that, right? And so COVID happened, and we were healthcare professionals from the US, and we came back to work, right? 2020 and 2021 were challenging years professionally for all healthcare workers, and I was included in that. And so I made the commitment to get back into the heart of nursing, and why did I get to be a nurse? I didn't want to be burnt out, and so I reflected back to Ghana and the AIDS epidemic, and I was like, wow, public health has been my passion from the beginning. And so I reached out to Leah Swanson, because I had met her through COVID, and I said, hey, do you have any volunteer opportunities? I'm looking to get back to the heart of nursing and my why. And she said, well, yeah, sure. I have this funding, and we have this wagon with vaccines, and I'm losing funding. Would you want to take this on? I said, absolutely. And so that's how Mint was started. Me and another volunteer, we cruised around with a wagon. We started offering vaccines and a few other things. And then before we knew it, we had a truck full of food and more offerings. And then just a few months later, more people heard about it, and the next thing you know, we have a dozen of agencies coming down each Thursday to offer services and resources to our most vulnerable population. On top of that, we have volunteers providing hot food, coffee. We have a medical van with really cool medical providers to boot. What happens on Thursdays is absolutely amazing what we get to do. But what a lot of people don't know is there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work with Mint that happens. And that's the kind of work that I think gives us the outcomes we are looking for. It's those individual connections, the relationships we made with the people who are living in the streets or unhoused, the fellowship, the hope, the love that we're able to give them. It allows for trust. It allows for us to build friendship, right? Then we get psychological safety, which is critical. Once we have psychological safety, these people are able to make that hard next step to improve their lives. For me, I spent over 2 years getting to know the people in the parks just because I had to, I wanted to. It was like I was in Ghana, just that sense of community, like I just had to be near them. And what was amazing to me as we grew all this, I grew. They allowed me to heal. It was about 9 months into volunteering with Mint that I had my first suppressed memory bubble up. I had no idea they were there. If you remember, the story starts at the age of 17, and it's because I don't remember a good portion of my childhood, and I didn't really know why. I have since been able to resurface and process a variety of childhood traumas that I didn't even know that I had. And I was only able to do that through the community that we created with Mint and the people that we were serving. I began to understand my passion and my drive to help these people. It's because I empathized with their pain, and I didn't even know it until I was 40 years old. It was just a shock to me. The thing is, with trauma, is we all have it. Every single person in this room has trauma. But it's the safety nets that we have in place that prevent us from succumbing to the pain, from allowing that trauma to take over our lives. I'm gonna get my notes out because I knew I'd get stuck on this part, so bear with me. For me, the memory of my first safety net happened in middle school. I was sitting outside of the Gold Hill Pharmacy, that's where I was living at the time, right next to Ray's Marketplace. And a lot of my friends would come out there and we'd hang out after school for whatever reason. There was nothing to do in Gold Hill. And then I remember one day this lady, she had gray curly hair and she was so nice and she worked the register at the pharmacy. She came out one day and talked to us and she pulled me aside and she said, "Come in, will you come in here?" And so I did, and I talked to her for a long time. And she chatted with me, she asked me a lot of questions, and then she pulled out this teddy bear and she gave it to me and she said, "I bought it for you and I want you to have that." And then she talked to me a little bit more, and she asked me about church, and she said, "Have you ever been to church?" And I said, "No, I hadn't." And to be honest, I'd never even been invited. And she pointed out the window, and she said, "Well, there's my church over there. If you want to come one weekend, you can." And so I did. I went to church with her one weekend, and I never saw her again. Never saw this woman again. But what stands out to me is that's the memory that I remember from childhood. It was the hospitality, the love, her bringing me in and seeing me as a stranger that stands out to me. It's not sleepovers with my friends. It's not holidays with my families. It is this woman who saw me and gave me love and hope. And what we get to do with Mint is bring resources, provide medical care, do all sorts of things. But the love and hope and the sense of community that we get to provide them is the unquantifiable magic that truly transforms lives. And that's what transformed mine. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Before our intermission, we're going to have music by Heidi Sundin. Heidi's been playing piano for nearly 25 years with her incredible grandmother as her teacher. Her passion for music extends to her role as a dedicated piano teacher and accompanist, where she shares her knowledge and skill with aspiring musicians. Through her years of experience, Heidi's performed in many musicals, choral concerts. Please help me welcome Heidi. Thank you, Heidi. We'll now have a 15-minute intermission. About 10 after 8, we'll be back and hear some more music and some more stories. And always a great chance for community right now to get to visit, to know some new people. Thank you. If I could have everybody take their seats, please, we'll get started with the second half. Hey there. The best part of the intermission is the community that goes out of the conversations, but if we don't break it, have it end, then we end up till too late in the evening, so it's a kind of a trade-off, so thanks for coming back. So welcome back, and for our second half, we're going to start out with music by Three Rivers Chorale, Dreamland. Please help me welcome back Three Rivers Chorale, and thank them. Thank you. Our next storyteller is Angela Franklin, and Angela has lived in Southern Oregon for the last 12 years and currently resides in Takilma. She is a community educator and advocate, a death midwife, and behavioral health specialist and artist. She and her husband Michael founded Journey Home Support Services located in Cave Junction. Please help me welcome Angela as she talks about the untold story.
Okay, hello. So every family has stories untold. And I'm gonna tell the story that my grandma Marion held for over 85 years in secret. So my very first memory of my great-grandmother, so this is my grandma Marion's mother, was when I was 9 years old. I and my family, I grew up in North Idaho. And so my family lived in Missouri, and we would get to go there every maybe 5 or 6 years. And so we decided to go back when I was 9 for my great-grandmother's birthday, and we had a family picnic. Now, this is the only memory that I have of my great-grandmother. Her name was Mildred Frederica McShay, and I was introduced to her as this is your great-granddaughter, Angie B., that's what they called me, and she got out this little box of jewelry, and she handed me a ring, and this ring was beautiful. It was flat and black and had mother-of-pearl flowers on it, and it was so special to me because this is a woman that I had never met before. I didn't hear stories about. No one really talked about great-grandma McShay. And so I had that ring on, and about an hour later, I'm walking past her, going to get some food, and I wave at her, and her face drops, and she accuses me of stealing her ring in front of the entire family. And this broke something in me. And my aunt, took me aside and said, "Oh, honey, I just want you to know that we love you. You did nothing wrong. We're gonna give her back the ring. And, your great-grandma, she can kind of be mean sometimes. Sometimes she's confused. So I just want you to know that I love you." So that's my story that I held my entire life of my great-grandma McShay. So then when I'm in my early 20s, I start getting interested in genealogy. And at that time, people had started dying in my family. And so I had this kind of frenzy of I need to get stories from all of my elder relatives. And so I asked my dad, "Can you please find out any information about the McShay side of the family?" And he says, "Well, the McShays aren't our family. You didn't know that your grandmother's biological dad died when she was a baby, and that we don't know really anything about that side of the family. We think maybe Sweden or Norway, but even grandma doesn't really know." So at that time, I was visiting my mom, and I was going through all of our family little boxes that she kept for each of us kids, because I'm getting to the age where she's like, "I can't carry all this around. So you need to go through your box and decide what you want to keep and what you want to get rid of." And as I did that, I found this interview that I had with my grandma, and I don't ever remember asking her. I don't ever remember writing it, but it gave me some information about the story. And it was about the Great Depression, So most of you know that in elementary school, middle school, we're always doing assignments about our family during the Great Depression. What was it like for you? And so I was reading this, and it said, I was born in Chicago, and during the Great Depression, my mom had me go stay with my grandma and her sisters. And so I lived on a farm. We had chickens, we had food from the garden. They were all seamstresses. So I didn't really feel the effects of the Great Depression. My mom, however, stayed back in Chicago and was on her own. So I don't really know how she fared. But when I was a teenager, I went back and lived with my mom in Chicago. So this was all kind of like, wow, I've never heard these things before. And so when my grandma in 2018, she got really sick. And so I asked her, or I didn't ask her because she was in Missouri, I was here in Oregon. I asked my dad, he said, I'm gonna go visit your grandma, and she's not doing well, so this might be our last Thanksgiving. And I said, will you please ask her about any names, anything that you can remember from her childhood, because I really want to find out about her family. I want to give that gift to her. I want to know. And he did. And so the next morning, this is the morning after Thanksgiving, I get a phone call from my dad. And he sounds a little strange. And he says, I did what you asked me, and I did it before Thanksgiving dinner. And my mom said, you know what? I have a story I need to tell you, and we'll do it after Thanksgiving, or after dinner. So he relays the story to me. He relays that she sat everyone down. He had 6 sisters, but only 4 of them were living at that time. And so all of them sat down together, and she said, so you want to know why I was with my grandma and my aunts on a farm? And she said, it's because my mother was a lady of the night. And that, I was like, wow. Not expecting that at all. And it was my dad who then said, can you imagine? Can you imagine what she went through? Thinking of a person who lost her husband before her daughter was even 1 year old, was rejected by that family, and had to find a way to move through the world in Chicago as a single mother with no resources, with a child, that young. And so that got me thinking about the trauma that different people in our lives have gone through, and really how that story changed everything for me. And I, at first, thinking of I should be feeling some kind of shame. I should be feeling some kind of horror. All these negative things. I would never want to tell anyone about this. But it shifted something in me. It made me expand. It made me feel like this warmth and this love. And it gave me connection and compassion for a woman who was nasty. She was mean. None of the family, would choose to actually go visit her. And so that change in my story completely changed my life. And I feel like I have a connection with an ancestor now. It's been maybe 10 years since she died. At the age of 103, she was that stubborn. And so I don't know if it changed my father's life and his connection with his grandma. I don't know if it changed my aunt's connection with her, but I definitely know that it changed me. And I have a feeling that some of these untold stories that our families hold, some are a lot heavier than others. And so I like to think that it might have changed my grandma's life. She said this 2 months before she died. So I hope that she carried less weight. It was less heavy for the last months, the last days, the last breaths. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next storyteller is Nolan Guerrero, and Nolan moved to Southern Oregon as a child and grew up right here in Grants Pass. He received a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology from Southern Oregon University and currently works as a manager at the Josephine County Library District. Nolan's going to be talking about, is there a limit to how much we can change? Please help me welcome Nolan.
It's Saturday, 2023. It's July. It's a Saturday in July, 2023. It's my day off. I'm working on some cleaning projects in my house. I decide to tackle the dining room table. I've been avoiding it. There's piles of library books I need to go through, mail that needs to be dealt with, but I get distracted. See, the other side of the table, about half of the table, has been taken up by photos for the past month or so. My mom has been doing some reorganizing, and so she's been going through some family photos. And there's one in particular that catches my eye. Black and white, maybe 3 inches by 5, a picture of 2 young men in uniforms. One has an arm wrapped around the other. I don't recognize the one on the right, but the one on the left, I know him by his smile. It's my great uncle, my Tío John. So I moved here when I was a kid, but I spent the first 6 years of my life in Riverside, California, surrounded by family, especially on Sundays. Sundays were the days that my family would pile into our car, drive from Riverside to San Bernardino, and visit with my great uncle. My great uncle was the only sibling to my abuelo, my grandfather, on my dad's side of the family, and he never married or had children, but he doted on my sisters and I like we were his own grandchildren, like he was a second grandfather to us. There was special ice creams in the fridge. He had this little table that he bought that was just the right size for my sisters and I, so we had somewhere special to sit. He would load my parents down with bags of groceries before we left. I always think of him in all of my memories as having a huge smile, as being filled with joy and laughter. On the opposite end of that was my grandfather. My abuelo loved my sisters and I, but he was much more muted, much quieter. There was special ice cream in the fridge, and he always had a special word or two for us, but I always just remember he seemed to have a sort of sadness. I asked my mother about it, and she explained to me that shortly before I was born, my abuela, my grandmother, passed away, and he never really recovered from that. So I always thought I knew the story of these 2 men. They both passed away when I was relatively young, my great uncle when I was about 7 or 8, and my grandfather when I was 9. But I'm standing here holding this photo, and I'm curious about what the story, there's something there. So I ask my mother, And she gives me a little bit more context. Based off of how old he is, based off of the background, the uniforms, we think it was when he was stationed in South Korea. He was in the Air Force. But then she tells me a little bit more. When my great uncle was diagnosed with cancer, he had to move the last few months of his life. He had to move into a skilled nursing facility. And when my mom and my dad's siblings went to collect his things, they found this photo in his nightstand drawer. He didn't bring many possessions with him, but he brought this photo. And I think about that for a while. I carry it with me because I'm wondering what the weight of that means. Because like I said, I thought I always knew their story. But what if I got it wrong? What if my great uncle had someone he loved just as much as my grandfather and lost, but he couldn't carry his grief as outwardly? What if he also had his own sadness? The thing about pulling at threads is it's hard just to do one. You start to find more. And so as I'm thinking and reframing the story of my great uncle, I start to wonder whether I knew the story of my great grandfather, or my grandfather, or really maybe how I was doing an injustice to him. Because our lives only overlapped for about 9 years, and I only ever thought of him as sad, but he had 40 years of joy with my grandmother. And what does it mean to make his story so much smaller by just thinking of it through my own lens? As I think about reframing stories, I also start to think, even though maybe I didn't know either of these two people, maybe they never also really got to know me. The version of me that they knew was incredibly shy. I almost never talked to anyone outside of my parents or my siblings. I never felt comfortable in my own skin. The world at large felt terrifying. The idea that I would ever become the kind of person who could stand in front of a room full of people and tell a story, the kind of person who could manage a department and make decisions, seems baffling. It's taken a lot of time to become the version of me that I like, this version of me that I feel comfortable with. And as I start to think of reframing stories, it's very easy to live in the joy of change. But I start to realize how there is still a little bit of a voice inside of my head that says, what if there's a limit? What if you are only allowed to change so much? What if there's only so much you can really become yourself? That someday the world is going to look at me and say, you are too much. You are too loud. You are too different. You need to be more quiet. And I think about that. I asked my parents if I could have the photo. I haven't found the right frame for it, but once I do, I want to hang it on my wall. What I've taken away from kind of this story of this idea of reframing things is really this understanding that in the end, the only person who is allowed to say how much your story changes is you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next storyteller is Teresa Cisneros. She's a proud mom, sister, daughter, and friend. Worked in the social justice sector for over 20 years in different areas, including politics, nonprofits, as a mediator, motivational speaker, and a truth to power, do what needs to be done to break down barriers. She was raised by West Texas dirt and a big-time daddy's girl. And everything she's ever done has been for her sons Chris and Mimo, the light of her life, and daughter Alina Jade. Love and grace is all that she's really interested in for the current times, and she's sure that's sure to change. Please help me welcome Teresa, as it's never too scary to change.
I am going to do my very best to tell you stories tonight. This afternoon I started getting a cold, so I might sound a little funny, but it'll be a good story. Of course, I'm the kind of storyteller that says, give me a topic, and I'll give you something. Whatever comes up, what's on top. That's a very traditional way. I'm an indigenous person. I say indígena chicana. So I come from the tribal people of Somesek, which is what we now call Texas. And I also have some Apache and Aztec and other tribal connections. And my tribal people also speak Spanish. And then becoming identified as Mexican after the invasion was survival for my people. And so I just wanted to share that little piece with you, but I also want to say that I share that because I'm not from this territory, and out of respect for the people who are caretakers of this land, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the Shasta, Takelma, Latgawa, Klamath peoples. When I heard him say the title, change has been such a really big part of my life since I was a child. And what's the title again?
It's never too scary to change.
It's never too scary to change. And when I was driving here, I thought, that is a crock-up. Where did I get that from? Why did I even say that? I guess I was thinking about changing my shoes or my pants. I don't know. Whatever was on top that I got that title, I thought, that is not accurate. However, I do want to say that what has brought me here to this moment has been my courage to face change. And I really believe that there's two really big reasons why people change. One is because you have to. There's just no other option. And you're either getting your butt kicked by life, and you have to change, or something feels really amazing and wonderful and right. And that's what causes you to change. So those are the two reasons that I think about. In the skin and body that I'm in, I've mostly I'm getting my ass kicked by life. And so I either had to make a decision of how am I going to face this world, this culture, the generation that I'm in. How am I going to walk within this world with this sense of autonomy and this sense of power that I was raised with by my family, especially my dad, which is why I said I'm a big-time daddy's girl. So one of the biggest lessons my dad taught me, we were raised Catholic, and he was also a Catholic, and he was a deacon in the church. And my mother, we went to Mass, I don't know how much, sometimes, depending on what holiday it was, we could go to Mass 7 to 10 times a week, if you can imagine that. So you older generation Catholics understand that is that's a real thing that you do. And I remember something in him getting so frustrated that church was taking away from our family time. That why were we spending so much time at church when we needed to be spending time with the family, because he was a farmer and it was hard to find that time, and church was taking away from that. And so he took me up. We always had our talks on the roof of the house, and he took me up to the roof of the house, and he's I'm just gonna be my dad. He'd stand up there and he'd say, "Teresa, let me tell you something. There ain't no God in that church. That man's never even had babies. How is he supposed to tell us about faith and loving God? And you have to remember that God is right here. Where is God? God's right here." And he would quiz me. Every day he'd say, where's God? Right here. Where's the truth? Right here. And he really ingrained that in me. And he raised me to speak up and I didn't understand it at the time. You know, I thought I was just being a brat. Everybody called me a brat. Oh, you're just daddy's girl. Oh, your dad lets you get away with everything. Your daddy this. And I just thought, you know, I was proud of that. I thought, yeah, that's right. So watch it. You got to watch yourself. But as a child, you don't really understand that. And what that really did for me is that it gave me a sense of who I am and what I'm made of. And I've always known that I can get through anything. Like, you bring anything at me, I know I can figure it out, and I know I can do it. Because I'm not afraid to walk through the pain. And I'm not afraid to face what's on the other side. I have experienced change in it. Sometimes when I'm looking at myself in the mirror now, having adult children and really wanting grandchildren now. And my daughter, who is 11, whom I adore. It's hard for me to fathom that I even got here, because my family were a farm worker family. In fact, my parents were migrant workers, and they met in Phoenix, Oregon. And they met picking cherries before the cherry trees all died because of I don't know what happened, but something happened. And that's where they met, and my dad said, we gotta go back home, because if we're gonna raise a family, we're not gonna be migrants. And so they went back home. We were very poor. I didn't know we were poor because we had everything. And you know, we grew our own food, we butchered our own animals, we smoked, we smoked our own meats. We lived off the land, and that was just that was normal for me. I tell people, I remember eating my first store-bought egg, and that I cried because I thought my mom was punishing me for something I did, because it tasted so horrible. I was in kindergarten, I remember. We had just moved, and I was eating on a box, and I just thought I was in trouble because it was horrific. I was 17 years old when I had my first slice of pizza. So that's the kind of life that I had. However, I love my family and where I come from and what they were able to teach me, especially my dad, but he had really big, deep, dark demons. And so I grew up in a violent home. And so change for me was hope. Like, all I could think about was changing. I wanted my dad to change. I wanted our life to change. I wanted my mom to change and stand up for herself and to stand up for us. I wanted everything to change, except I was powerless. At least I thought I was. And I dove into escaping by reading. And in that time, when I was a kid, reading was how we see cell phones now. It's like, get your face out of that book, get to work, there's always a chore to be done. Did you wash the dishes? Did you go feed the cow? Or whatever that was. So I would hide. And we had 2 trees, and one of them was really big and really tall. And I would climb the tree, and I hid books up there. I know, I hid books. And I would go up there to escape and read. And I would do it really fast, especially when my mother was angry and she was chasing after me. I could climb that tree faster than she could run. And so I'd just stay up in the tree longer than, she'd kind of wait her out, and eventually she'd just forget, because I have my sister and my brother she's having to worry about as well. So it's like, I got my books, I'm fine. But I started to really get a sense of me having power when I read The Diary of Anne Frank. And I was in the 3rd grade when I read that book, and it devastated me in so many ways. The story devastated me, her death devastated me, but what was even more devastating was that I, in this time now, was reading her story. after she was gone, and I realized that no matter what, I can have an impact on the world, on situations. I can have an impact. And so I started reading like crazy. The first thing, as a Catholic, I didn't have a lot of access to a lot of books, but we had a book of saints, and I read about all the saints and what they were doing. St. Francis was an ass kicker. My gosh, I fell in love with St. Francis. Mother Mary, you know, there's just all these different saints who were really incredible that inspired me. St. Francis is definitely one of them. And then I came upon the stories of Mother Teresa. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. It's a sign, because my name is Teresa. She's Mother Teresa. I just felt like it was a sign, and I read everything. I talked to the priest. Our priest, his mother, would come to visit often. And I guess I was pestering him, and he said, go talk to my mom. And she really took me in and started to give me all sorts of other books. And she got me Martin Luther King books, she got me Gandhi books, she got me other saint books, and then she got me some other Catholic books. And that's how I really started to empower myself and to know that there's always a way to change, and it's freaking scary. But you have to decide the story that you're telling yourself. What is the story that you're telling yourself about what change means? And does change mean that you're going to have to give something up in order for it to be better for the greater good? Does change mean that you have to stop shaming yourself and really showing up? What does that mean? What is the story that you're telling yourself? Because the story that I'm telling myself right now is that we're all in this together, and there really is nothing greater than love, and there's nothing greater than community and compassion. That's my story. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if I would have been quicker on the draw, I could have said, it's never too late to change this title of your story, too. Okay, to finish out the evening, we're going to hear from Three Rivers Chorale. Please help me welcome them back. Thank you.
So nice to see familiar faces. I think I've been in Grants Pass long enough now that I'm starting to recognize people, though I may not remember your name. This next song and our last offering tonight to send you out into the world with some peace is also from a book. It's from a story by Rudyard Kipling, and he wrote this beautiful lullaby from a mother seal to her baby. It's called The Seal Lullaby by Eric Whitaker.
Thank you again so much. You know, as we wrap up tonight, first of all, thank you to our storytellers and our musicians. You know, I hope you leave this building tonight more comfortable with the knowledge that it's never too late to change our story or even stories. Sometimes it can be a small change. Other times it's a big change. Some changes we want to make because we want to make ourselves make a change. Other times we make a change because somebody else cost us to make that change. However your change occurs, welcome or otherwise, please remember that change is part of our lives, and our reaction to this change is up to me. And as these stories change, please remember to take care of yourself and others. Our next Hearth is going to be on April 25th, right here at Bethany Presbyterian, and the featured nonprofit will be Southern Oregon Guild. Please, thanks again for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and drive safely.